as we begin this morning covering the historic federal indictment of former President Donald J. Trump. The 7 counts against Trump stem from the investigation into how he handled classified documents after leaving the White House. This is an unprecedented move because it is the first time the Justice Department has ever brought federal charges against a former president. Trump released a video last night defending himself. Here is what he said.
We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax. I'm an innocent man. We will prove that again. 7 years of proving it, and here we go again.
Well, sources confirmed to CBS News Trump is scheduled to be arraigned on Tuesday at the federal courthouse in Miami. So we have team coverage of this major story, starting with CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. In its more than 150-year history, the Justice Department has never been here before. The federal indictment of a former president who's the front runner for his party's nomination. And as he has tried in the past, Trump tried to set the narrative out front.
I'm an innocent man. I did nothing wrong.
Within minutes of announcing his own indictment on social media, former President Donald Trump declared his innocence and blamed Democrats for the special counsel's move.
They figure the way they're going to stop us is by using what's called warfare. And that's what it is. This is warfare for the law.
Trump's attorney says the 7 counts include unlawful retention of national defense information, obstruction, conspiracy, and false statements. The criminal charges grew out of a nearly year-long probe into Trump's handling of hundreds of documents marked classified. After issuing a subpoena to turn over government records last year, the FBI searched Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. In total, more than 300 records, including some marked top secret, have been recovered. Trump's attorneys met with Justice Department officials earlier this week. Days after CBS News confirmed, investigators obtained an audio recording in which the former president acknowledges he held onto a sensitive Pentagon memo about Iran after leaving the White House.
Everything I did was right.
Throughout the investigation, the former president has maintained that he did nothing wrong and claimed he declassified the sensitive materials when he left the White House.
And the Presidential Records Act is not criminal. I took the documents I'm allowed to.
Trump also took aim at the Biden administration, accusing it of weaponizing the Justice Department. Before news of the indictment broke, Mr. Biden insisted the department acts independently.
I have never once, not one single time, suggested to the Justice Department what they should do or not do relative to bringing a charge or not bringing a charge.
And a law enforcement official tells CBS News that later today, the Secret Service and Trump staff will meet to develop a threat assessment and a security plan for Tuesday's arraignment, in Miami. Anne-Marie.
I bet. So, Catherine, you know, we played a little bit of the video on Truth Social that he posted, and he outed himself. That's how we found out that he was indicted. What else did he say in that video?
Well, the former president makes the case in this extended video that he is innocent. He calls this a weaponization of the Justice Department. He says it's warfare, but using the law, so that's warfare or lawfare, if you will, and he calls it the box's hoax, and he refers directly to special counsel Robert Mueller and the investigation into Russia collusion. That was a case in which no criminal charges were conspiring with the Russians. Anne-Marie.
And then in regards to how the things will proceed, what's the potential timeline for the indictment to be unsealed?
Well, we've never been here before. What would be standard practice is that the prosecutors could ask a judge to unseal the indictment that contains these 7 charges. It's not clear to us that they've done that or whether they will wait till next Tuesday when the arraignment is upon us, allowing them to maintain an element of surprise. But I would be on sort of indictment watch over the next 72 hours to see if it is released and we can independently analyze the charges and the evidence.
And as you know, this is not the former president's only legal battle that he's dealing with. There's a couple of cases here in New York. Of course, Georgia, they are investigating his attempts to change the outcome of the election. You know, none of them have to do with classified documents, but could the impact of this indictment have any sort of impact on the other investigations?
Well, I think it has an impact, Anne-Marie, of the larger picture of the former president's legal problems. This is the most serious legal exposure that he faces, because these are criminal charges that have to do with the stewardship of the national security. And he is promoting himself as someone who has the skill set and the trust to be a president of the United States for a second term. So it undermines, I think, one of his central arguments for his election. And I think it just creates a lot more legal trouble with limited bandwidth to defend himself.
Catherine Herridge, thank you.
You're welcome.
And now we're going to talk about something that Catherine brought up. Secret Service officials are meeting with former President Trump's staff and security officers today, to come up with a plan for his court appearance on Tuesday. So for more on that, we want to bring in Manuel Bojorquez. He's standing by outside of the courthouse in Miami. This has never happened before. They're coming up with a plan. They're making up a plan.
That's right. We do know that they are meeting. We may not know the details of what kind of security plan they come up with, because typically they will keep those close to the vest. And although this is unprecedented, a president being indicted, a former president being indicted with federal charges, we do have a similar circumstance to look back on, and that's when the president faced an arraignment in Manhattan. A similar situation there, with a lot of media attention, a lot of protesters, and happening in a big, densely populated part of that city. This is also a very densely populated part of Miami. There are office buildings, the courthouse, of course, but also there are residential buildings. So a lot of logistical challenges will have to be looked at as they prepare for that arraignment on Tuesday. And we don't know at this point where the president would be coming from. In Manhattan, he had the apartment where he was just able to go a few miles down to the courthouse. His residence here, of course, is Mar-a-Lago, which is about an hour and a half north of where we are in downtown Miami. So a lot of those details still being ironed out this morning.
Yeah, and when he, went to court in Manhattan, there were all these questions about where exactly the Secret Service was going to be able to go, with other people who are defendants. They don't get to bring their personal security into certain areas of the courthouse. So could you take us through just what we can expect Tuesday to play out at the courthouse in terms of security?
I can tell you this, federal courthouses typically have really beefed up security on a normal day. I've covered cases where you couldn't even bring in a phone. So that layer of security will be there, plus another added layer of security, in that you have the Secret Service there with a former president. Unlike the Manhattan appearance, typically federal courthouses do not allow cameras in. So you remember in Manhattan, you had that shot of him walking through the hallway into the courtroom. That may not happen in this case. Of course, all of this is up to the discretion of federal judges, but typically they shy away from any cameras inside. We may just see him going in and out.
And I know it's sort of really early on, and so we maybe don't have protocol here, but usually when there's a lot of interest in a case, there are lineups outside of courtrooms with people getting up good and early to see if they can get a place in their media and others. Have we been given any instructions as to how that will be controlled or how that will unfold?
Not at this point. Typically for media, we'll get a sense early on of where you need to sign up, where you need to line up in order to get in. As far as I know, those instructions have not been put out yet. So all of this is still pretty fresh. So we'll have to wait and see. But of course, there's always the possibility and the very likelihood that there will be protesters and members of the public as well who are trying to get an eye on this. So there will have to be a lot of people control happening out here as that Tuesday arraignment is set to happen.
Indeed. Manny Bojorquez, thank you very much, Manny.
Thank you.
So here for more analysis is CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, it's really good to see you. I don't think I've sat down sort of next to you probably since before the pandemic, so it's good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
When we knew that an indictment was imminent, there was all this talk. Is it going to happen in D.C.? Is it going to happen in Florida? A lot of people were leaning towards Florida because, listen, that's where the classified documents were, so that's where the crime sort of took place, if you will. Explain the significance of it happening in Florida.
I think it's significant on a number of levels. First of all, strategically, it's really a smart decision on the part of the special prosecutor. And that's because what it does is it blunts an attack from the defense that the special prosecutor, according to the defense, if they had chosen D.C., would be looking for a more favorable jury pool. Whereas, where did all of this happen? The documents were stored at Mar-a-Lago. The search warrant was issued at Mar-a-Lago. The documents were retrieved from Mar-a-Lago And the obstruction, should it be proven, happened at Mar-a-Lago. The only thing that's in Washington, D.C. is the National Archives. Now, it doesn't mean you could not have brought it in D.C. You certainly could have.
And could that still happen? Could we see charges there?
There could be other charges that are brought in D.C., but at the moment, what we see, and certainly looks like this is pretty complete, is happening in Florida.
Right.
And that takes away a motion to dismiss. It takes away issues of prosecutorial misconduct about the choice of venue. Very smart move.
So listen, you know the way people consume news. They don't always get a chance to sit down and watch the whole thing. Sometimes they just read the headlines, and they're going to see Donald Trump indicted in a classified document investigation. And they're going to say, well, you know, Joe Biden had documents that were classified at his house. The former Vice President, Mike Pence, did. Can you talk to us about how this is different than what we saw in some of these other cases?
Well, it's completely different, and Donald Trump put himself in this position. The dilemma was created by him. Mike Pence, Joe Biden, both said, come search. Here, my door is open to you. Whatever you need to search, be my guest. Because apparently the protocols and procedures about leaving the government and what documents you take or what you simply pack up, there just really are not sufficient protocols to ensure that documents which should belong to the National Archives or might be classified or might be secret, there are not enough protocols in place. So if you're negligent and you wind up with things by mistake, but you open your door, then that's not a crime where you've hit a level of gross negligence or intentional conduct. Here, Donald Trump, many requests were made of him to get these documents. And then he fooled around with the requests. He did not comply, at least not totally. Then there was a grand jury subpoena, and on it goes until finally the National Archives Department of Justice said, we've got to execute a search warrant. So why he held on to these documents is really a mystery. The motive for holding on to them is not only unclear, it makes no sense.
And it's also, too, like the nature of the documents, right? As we've learned through this whole process, there are all kinds of classifications. And they're not always, you know, it could range from, I don't know, a shopping list, say, for whatever reason. But it's about, these particular documents have to do with national defense and national security. Very serious.
Very, very serious. The Espionage Act, as it is applied and as you read it, having to do with a case like this, has to do with the retention of documents that are involved in the national defense, that they would hurt the United States if disclosed or disseminated, or aid an enemy. That is as serious as it gets.
So Donald Trump did something that we've seen him do before. He got ahead of the official announcement and took to social media to let everyone know that he was being indicted, and he used different phrases for being indicted. And so I'm curious, from an attorney's point of view, your take on this, kind of bringing it out. The court of public opinion will probably not have much sway, but what's your take on this strategy? He's done it before.
The difficulty always with politicians, whether it's Donald Trump or others, is that if there are questions of liability or culpability, that you have one audience, which is the public, because you're, in this case, running for office, let alone trying to defend your own reputation. But then you have the reality of the only audience you should be concerned about, which is ultimately a judge and a jury. So here, I do not know what his lawyers said to him, if anything, about finding out about the indictment. But even if his lawyers told him not to go to social media, if it was his decision, or if his lawyers told him it was okay, from a legal point of view, it's not okay. Because what he winds up doing continuously is talking. And it's his talking that gets him into the most trouble.
Right.
You know, one of the things about the Espionage Act, the most difficult question, and we've heard it talked about for over a year, is how do you show the gross negligence or intentional conduct? Well, he has explained that what he did was willful. He said he could take these documents and he could declassify them because he was president of the United States. In fact, there was the time he said he could just think about declassifying them, or as I call it, the telepathy defense. But the reality is that you cannot do this under the Espionage Act. It's not that simple.
Rikki Klieman, great having you here. Something tells me we'll be talking more in the future.
I think so.
Thank you so much.
Okay.